Thanks a lot, Tallaght, and thanks a lot to Deputy Daly for bringing forward this bill, which we support, and indeed the call to ban solitary confinement altogether, which obviously in many circumstances is a form of torture. I think the government's response is very, very poor. It's very unfortunate that they won't agree to support this bill. I'll come back to their response in a few minutes. I just want to start with some quotes from a man called Anthony Graves, who spent years in solitary confinement. He wrote, he says that the way they treated me was dehumanising. It was like I was an animal. I had 60 square feet with 4 walls that seemed to close in on me every day. I could sometimes hear guys screaming. Solitary confinement plays tricks on your mind. You're bound by 4 walls, you're cut off from society, and you're left with just your own thoughts. Sometimes you start to feel like, if they treat me like this, I'm going to act like this. And then you risk becoming the kind of person that it seems like they're trying to tell society that you are. Human contact was what I missed most, something that told me that I was still loved and that I was still able to love. We don't realise how important human contact is. When we give hugs and shake hands, it's because we need to. I don't know how to explain the emptiness it leaves when you're not allowed human contact anymore. It felt like they were starving me to death. So Anthony Graves wasn't in prison in Ireland. He was in prison in America, where solitary confinement is an absolute scourge, where 80,000 people are currently, or at any one time, in solitary confinement, over 20,000 for extended periods of time. Absolutely horrific conditions, including for political prisoners, those framed up like Mumia Abu Jamal, who has faced solitary confinement. It's used elsewhere around the world. We know Irish citizen Ibrahim Halawa has faced solitary confinement, and there's a very moving letter from him today in the papers, which should encourage us all and the government to act in the strongest way possible. But it isn't just in America, it isn't just overseas, it's in this country today. Obviously, historically, solitary confinement has played a role in this state. Countess Markovic, a member of this House, was subject to solitary confinement. Sheila Humphreys, at the foundation of this state in a counter-revolution, was subject to solitary confinement. Obviously, the British state used solitary confinement relatively extensively in Northern Ireland. But also, right here today in this state in the south, you have the use of solitary confinement, not defined as solitary confinement by the government. I thank the Irish Penal Reform Trust for the very useful information that they circulated, which demonstrates that on average there's 80 prisoners on any given day in 22 or 23-hour lockup in Ireland. And a census of Irish prisons in October 2016 showed there was 424 prisoners on a restricted regime of some sort, and the quite shocking figures that the Irish state has 24 prisoners in solitary confinement for over 100 days and 9 for over a year. Something interesting when looking at the figures is the allocation of those in solitary confinement to different prisons. 9 of the 31 currently are in Clover Hill, 11 are in Portlaoise. So 2 prisons amount for 2/3 of those currently in solitary confinement for reasons of order. And the numbers seem to fluctuate over time, over different years. For example, if you look at Clover Hill, and it might be useful for the Minister to pay attention for the particular reasons that lie behind the increases at particular times in particular prisons, why it's the case that so much is accounted for there. Juan Mendez, as has been quoted, the UN Special Rapporteur on torture, has been very, very clear, and he deals with this issue of not having a definition of solitary confinement by saying segregation, isolation, separation, cellular, lockdown, supermax, the whole, secure housing unit, whatever the name, solitary confinement should be banned by states as a punishment or extortion technique. And he says solitary confinement is a harsh measure which is contrary to rehabilitation, the aim of the penitentiary system. And I think that gets to the point here, which is that what is the aim of the penitentiary system, as he calls it? What is the aim of the penal system that we have? Because Is it, and this relates to solitary confinement, but it goes broader, is it about punishment? Is it about a transactional view of justice, of people getting a pound of flesh? Or is it about rehabilitation? Is it about the interest of society as a whole and doing the things that are best in the interest of society as a whole, having a society with as little crime and antisocial as is possible? And that gets to the heart of the approach, or the non-approach, unfortunately, of the government. I mean, it doesn't take an expert to realise that being locked up with extremely minimal human contact is devastating in terms of people's mental and physical health. An American study from 2006 showed that 1/3 of solitary confinement prisoners suffer from illusions or hallucinations. Over half have reported progressive inability to tolerate ordinary stimuli. Issues such as panic attacks, paranoia, a loss of concentration, insomnia and confusion, and also a negative effect on the physical health. Amnesty International have reported that half of all prison suicides in the US are in solitary confinement cells. Something even more worrying is the fact that after 15 days, the effect on someone's mental health can be irreversible. And that's demonstrated by some of the examples that you can read online, or even The Guardian has an app, 6x9, whereby you can experience for a couple of seconds or minutes or whatever what it would be like to be in solitary confinement, and then you multiply that by the number of days. And the state is willing to engage in this to deprive people of contact with other human beings and therefore their mental health. And there's also a particular concern raised for those who are on remand, those who are presumed innocent until proven guilty, with an even higher impact on their mental health. And the UN Special Rapporteur identified that those prisoners have a higher risk of suicide and self-harm than other prisoners, and it can crucially impact on their decisions, their ability to make decisions relating to their upcoming trials, such as guilty pleas, confessions, etc. Just to finish, in terms of the government's response, I mean, it's really extremely poor. The government's response is to say that the bill attempts, quote, the bill attempts to micromanage in primary legislation the regime for dangerous, unwell, vulnerable and disruptive prisoners. So say this isn't something that we should be engaged in, leave it for secondary legislation. I mean, let's look at what's actually in the bill. Solitary confinement could not be for any longer than 15 days at a time and no more than 30 days in a year. I mean, does the government, does the minister, does the Taoiseach, do you believe that people should be held in solitary confinement for longer than 15 days whenever we know that it can have a permanent impact on people's mental health? Or do you believe that people should be held in solitary confinement for more than 30 days in a year? The bill contains a provision that it can't be used as a punitive exercise, in line with what the UN Special Rapporteur says. Do you think that it should be used as a punitive exercise? The bill says that they cannot be used for the disabled or mentally unwell. And a doctor and mental health professional would have to visit a prisoner in solitary confinement in the first day. It's not an unreasonable request whatsoever. It says it cannot be used for those on remand. Just bear in mind, those on remand have not been found guilty of anything. They maintain their innocence. That it can only be used in exceptional cases, and each case will be reviewed every 3 days. What response can the government have to that? And the idea that a prisoner would still have access to work, training, education and to family visits, and would still crucially have a right to make complaints through the normal way. I don't understand what the problem is with the limiting of the ability of a prison governor to implement solitary confinement in a prisoner in those ways. It doesn't go as far as many of us would like in terms of banning solitary confinement altogether, but it makes the government's unwillingness to accept it all the more outrageous, all the more uncaring, all the more inhumanitarian by the government. The last thing I'd say to you is that obviously the bill is going to pass second stage, which is good. So you're going to have to come up with something better at committee stage. You're going to have to engage with this, and if the consequence is that it has resource implications, so we don't torture prisoners, well then, yeah, that's a choice that will need to be made, and we'll have to allocate some resources so prisoners aren't mentally and physically tortured as a result of solitary confinement.